I use the word deliberately, to force agriculture, because really, it's difficult to produce something in Botswana in terms of agriculture. So I really think, Minister of Finance, this is, and the colleagues from the International Growth Center, this is the support we need. To be targeted, to be clear. We can do many things, but let's choose a few things that will make a difference. Again, in the side room, Professor says to us, just in soybeans alone, we're losing value of around $300 million a year. Just on the way we market the product we produce here, we're not managing properly. Yes, we're selling, but we're selling, maybe I should use the word he didn't use, we're selling at a loss. Why are we leaving money on the table? Because we're not applying our minds. I'm hoping this workshop, this platform today, by the end we close, at the time we close, at the end of this platform, and after the platform, we'll set steps that will lead us to, for example, how we can take the $300 million we're leaving on the table purely on one crop of soybeans. I guess that's my challenge. That's a challenge I'm throwing. You can say many things in this forum today. Yeah, you should. But at the end of the day, let's focus on drawing steps, walking path that will take us to bring in more money to this country. And when we do that, growth will come. Growth is a subset. It is the headline, but truly it's a subset of the specific activities, projects, things that we do in these sectors. So there's the challenge, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Mines. You and I have been talking privately for a long time. Can we learn quickly from what Botswana has done with the 1 minute? I think out of this workshop, I whispered to the Minister of Finance, it's time to now, this year in office, second year in office, to focus on a few things, having brought reasonable stability to the economy and working on the debt restructuring. Simultaneously, let's focus on a couple of things that will deliver a huge difference in a while from now. Agriculture, I touched on it already. I don't want to waste time. Let's connect also agriculture to climate change. Let's connect the two. I said to my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture, we have to plant trees as part of climate change. But if we ask ourselves the question, what type of trees are we planting? A simple question. Why should we plant a tree that produces no fruit, but is good for climate change mitigation? But we can plant agricultural trees, such as avocado, such as cashew, such as even mangoes, mulberries, which trees, the cost of planting them may be similar, but we also have added value as we do climate change mitigation. So let's connect agriculture to climate change. This is the contextual thinking, thought processes we would like to have as a country out of this opportunity mixing with those professors and these big ministers, industry players, all of us, central bank. Good governance, I made a comment of it. Fight against corruption will continue. We're working on a few things that we think we slept on duty, especially on the economic and financial court, make it fully operational. I know citizens that say, where's the conviction? Citizens are misunderstanding. The rule of law means an arrest does not equate to conviction. There's a process after an arrest. But the fact that people can be arrested this morning and tomorrow or in in the afternoon, they are back home because they are on bail. That's the rule of law. People must get bail. But the process must move quickly. We acknowledge it. But we're committed to making the changes that are necessary. And we know that without the rule of law, we cannot deliver on the economic side of the question. Without property, right, respect for property rights. I think yesterday I was in a meeting where we were talking about property rights. Where people just don't respect somebody's property. They walk in there, do what they want to do. Legacy of the past? No. We shouldn't allow that to happen. Because if we want to grow, we want investments, there must be order. There must be respect for what other people are doing, especially if they're working hard. As the message, you give very good message, great message. People work hard, thank you, sir. Those who don't work hard just want to walk in and take. God doesn't take away. So, I thought this is really something that I must mention, and we want to keep pushing the public-private dialogue forum. Yesterday we had a meeting. Early days, trying to correct a few things here and there, but we would like to enshrine that it becomes the way of working, that the private sector and government work together as one in accelerating economic growth. For the reasons we set this agenda on. Jobs, business opportunities. Minister of Finance and I think other ministers, private sector is there. One of the issues that is coming out now is that at a higher level we are doing the right things, we're saying the right things, but the system is not responding. The system is clogging down things. I think we should address this matter. The narrative at the top must be the same as the narrative in the middle and at the bottom. And local government ministers, it must be the same narrative in the local authorities. Because the greater part of this country is controlled by local authorities in terms of public services, licenses. So the language is different. So we must make the language the same. And the International Growth Center, these are some of the areas we would like to work together to see how we can unlock so that the language spoken at the bottom is the same in the middle, the same at the top, and vice versa. I think this will help us a lot. Zambia Development Agency, we need you to help push transactions, support transactions. So, our partnership with the International Growth Center should help us improve the effectiveness. The language, yes, but just getting things done. If I may use a simple word or expression, just getting things done. We don't have to beat each other down if we have a shared vision. We beat each other down, we stand in the way because we don't have a shared vision. So let us align our desires, because when we do, and with the help of experts, that's why they're here, to work with us, and experiences of Kenya, Ethiopia. I guess in the day these will be discussed. Experiences of Kenya, because it's good to talk about what is possible. Let's look at those who are doing it already, how they are doing it, so we learn from them, we avoid reinventing the wheel. Plus, on our side, time is always a factor. Time is always a factor. So we urge all stakeholders here today at this forum, please make your contribution to help us do things better, quicker. I should have said that agriculture, we're not just looking at production, quantum, production connoting quantum, amount we produce. But we're looking at agriculture. We've been talking here with the minister and stakeholders, but productivity, connoting efficiency. We are very inefficient in this country. With all the good agronomic conditions we have, we are very inefficient. We produce in a wasteful way. We would like to address those issues as well. So participants, please have a good day. I will stay around a little bit. I love to listen to people. Please don't get disturbed by my presence. I just want to learn from this capable group of people. And maybe we can push one or two angles to help ourselves. We wish you a fruitful day, and more importantly, the follow-up actions, narrowing down to a few things that are of significance. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so very much, Mr. President. I was Mr. Hagai Ndereji, President of the Republic of Zambia, giving us this keynote speech. And we all know that he has been the key driver of this economic drive, the growth and revamping of our economy. And indeed, we hope that all of us here will buy into the plan and do our best to contribute in whatever way that we can to the realization of our theme today and the overall growth of the economy of this country. Your Excellency, we have a number of presentations that we're hoping you will be able to be present for. The first of which is entitled Zambia's Economic Growth Diagnostic and Priorities. And this will be presented by the Minister of Finance and National Planning, Honorable Dr. Situmbeko Musokotwane, MP. So we'll invite Honorable Dr. Musokotwane to come and give us his first presentation of Zambia's Economic Growth Diagnostic and Priorities. Right now. Honorable Musokotwane, let's give him a round of applause, shall we?
Thank you very much indeed, and quite honestly, I don't want to take too much time because I think we are all curious to hear what the visitors are going to tell us. The diagnostics is what I've already indicated before. We all know about the fact that our growth has not been sufficient over the past number of years. And please take note of one factor, which sometimes we don't talk about so often. The population growth is not stagnant. The number of young people is always increasing and increasing and increasing. Arising out of that, we have a situation where 450,000 or thereabouts young people come on the labor market each year. As we speak now, we have a backlog, a huge backlog of unemployed people, not gainfully employed. This means that we have to work harder and to work faster, because how else would we be able to provide for the jobs of this backlog of people? On top of that, the backlog is not just about jobs. The backlog is also about creating social services functioning social services for the backlog, plus of course the old people, plus the new ones that are coming on the scene. So this means that we really have to work very hard. But the good news is that in spite of this backlog, our population remains relatively small. So if we work hard enough, we may not be able to solve all the problems in one go, but we'll be able to demonstrate that something is working. Because somebody who is not in employment, but can see that their colleague has been employed because there's a new company that is opened up, they're likely to have patience, they're likely to have confidence, they're likely to try harder. So this is the challenge that we have. And of course, to absorb all this are the economic sectors, the mining sector that the President talked about. Indeed, we need to get to that 3 million tons of copper. If the impact of the sector is going to be similar to the impact that it had when some of us were school children, we were able to go to school for free, we were able to enjoy so many services, because we were few. The 800,000 tons of copper that was there then took care of 3-4 million people. But today we've got 18, 19 million people. So how can the mining sector have impact on us unless we can produce more, and more we can? And your instructions, Mr. President, of how to ensure that as a starting point, those assets that are underperforming can perform, that is very clear. The agriculture sector also is very important, not just for the sake of supporting our small-scale farmers, but also to support our industry. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to be able to create raw materials out of the agriculture sector? And just for the interest of our colleagues, the advisors, as we pursue industrialization based on agriculture, we are fortunate enough to have more land compared to many of our neighboring countries. So we are now also encouraging corporate agriculture. There is no reason why agriculture or Zambia should not be competing in the leagues of Brazil in terms of cereals, in terms of legumes, in terms of sugar, in terms of the fruits, which I know the Europeans are always importing out of the tropics at a time like this when they winter. But to get to those levels, we have to be mindful of the fact that we are competing with Australia, we are competing with Brazil itself, competing with Chile on the international market, competing with Israel, highly efficient. So, as we pursue this goal of being relevant on the international market, the cereals and the fruits, we also have to open up to the best in the world in terms of management skills in this sector, which of course is going to help our small-scale farmers, because as I said, by exporting, you are drawing in revenue from abroad. You are drawing in incomes from abroad. So that the Zambian population, those who are involved in this sector, will have better incomes, which then enables the local farmer, who may not be able to compete on the international scene, to be able to compete on the local scene, because there will be some foodstuffs that the local people will require to eat, and the local farmer that may not be as efficient as the big corporation suddenly has a market. So this is something that we are pursuing. tourism. Oh, before I go there, so to facilitate this large corporate sector, we are opening up the lands. Fortunately enough, with financing from the World Bank to create the infrastructure, roads, power, water development for irrigation in these sectors, which will be marketing very aggressively abroad, going to India, going to South Africa, going to Brazil, looking within the region, looking within Zambia, so that we can expand this. Similarly in tourism, we are also putting infrastructure. It's no longer good to say we have wildlife, the Victoria Falls, we have what and what. For these tourist assets to make money, the legal and regulatory framework must be friendly so that the investors can come and do their investments. But there are also areas which are so remote. They have the wildlife, yes, but how do you make sure that investors can take their lodges, the hotels there, unless you provide the infrastructure? So again, I want to thank the World Bank for listening after so many years that indeed we need to take infrastructure to some of these areas. So in short, what we are saying is that if we are going to borrow money to do infrastructure, we must borrow money to put infrastructure that is going to create money. The old idea of just borrowing to do infrastructure without a plan of how that infrastructure is going to create money, we must abandon that. So, as I said, I don't want to take too much time because this is the audience that I'm always speaking to, who want to listen to you. In concluding, let me just say that number one, we are working towards consolidating the issue of the unsustainable debt, because that is the link to the issue of stabilizing the economy, stable exchange rate, interest rates coming down, inflation coming down. We don't want to lose grip of that because this is a fundamental issue that needs to be maintained all the time. Beyond that, we want to work by creating an environment, either through policies, through laws, making the environment friendly, so that all these critical sectors, whether we're talking about mining, whether we're talking about agriculture, whether we're talking about tourism, whether we're talking about technology, so that we free them up, manufacture, free them up, so that they can begin to do what they know better in pursuit of profits. Encourage firms that come here to make profits, not to make losses. If you make losses, you are not helpful to us. So this is what, in short, this is the agenda of the government on the economic front. Of course, we look forward to hearing more from you. And of course, we are going to be having sideline meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Honorable Dr. Stombe Bomusokotwane, MP, Minister of Finance and National Planning. The next presentation is entitled Seizing Opportunities to Drive Sustainable and Inclusive Growth in Zambia. And to give us this presentation is Professor Sir Paul Collier, Professor of Economics at the University of Oxford and Director of the International Growth Center. Let's put our hands together as we welcome Professor Sir Paul Collier.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back here. I think I first came here 30 years ago, so I see plenty of old friends sitting around me. I last came here 2 years ago, and I have to say there were things happening in individual ministries, but I was invited by the head of state, and I decided, I'm afraid this will be my last visit to Zambia. I'm not coming again. That was 2 years ago. Why did I decide that? Because although there was things happening at an individual level, in different ministries, there was no overall sense of transformation. I'm an old man, and so I'm a little bit impatient. Old men can get just as impatient as young ones, Your Excellency. And so I decided I would only spend my time where there were countries which were genuinely on a course to transformation. Now, having come first 30 years ago, and most recently 2 years ago, I did see a lot of change, but I didn't see anything that added up to that sense of transformation. Things have improved, thanks to the efforts in individual ministries, individual people, but it wasn't on track to happen. So that was my resolve 2 years ago. No more visits to Zambia. So why am I here? I'm here because exactly a year ago, your new president sent me a message saying, I'm coming to London, I've read your books, I want to meet. That's why I'm here, because you've got a president who reads books. No time now. Here was a spirit of learning and inquiry, and I sensed that's the transformation I've been looking for, and that's why I'm back now. It's exactly a year since I first met your president, and I was deeply impressed. He set new goals, ambitious new goals, and in my few minutes, I haven't got time to talk about all of them, but I'm going to focus on one, and that is the spirit of inclusion. That was one of your goals, to be a president of inclusion. And I want to talk about how that can be achieved in practice. It means change. It means who does what, when, over what timeline. That's the process of change. And I remember visiting the copper belt about 20 years ago. And what struck me about the copper belt was that it was a region left behind. It was generating the copper that was paying for the wealth. But that wealth was being spent basically through a process of patronage of jobs in the public sector in Lusaka. And I sensed a real sense of anger in the copper belt. It was a place, a region left behind, and they were very conscious of that. There are not only regions, places left behind, there are people left behind, and none more so than youth outside that small privileged group of the insiders, the well-connected, who are able to use their connections and their patronage to get the scarce public sector jobs. The left behind people were people who had poor life chances. I just want to explain the concept of life chances for a moment. It's the chance that if you're born in the lower half of society, what's your chances of ending up in the top half? And there's enormous variation around the world, enormous variation. I have to say, my own country, Britain, you're not going to learn anything from. It's in the rich countries of the world,
it's got the most unequal life chances pretty well of anywhere. Right? So don't learn from us about how to have inclusive life chances, but there are places where you can learn from. So, Your Excellency, I think of you as the president of the left behind. That's, I think, what you mean by inclusion. There's going to be no one left behind anymore. And now the question is, how do you move from that wonderful goal? I should say, just as a personal footnote, both my own parents left school when they were 12. And under normal circumstances, I would have had no life chance. Right? I would have ended up as poor as my parents. But I was at a time in Britain when there was an opportunity for the left behind. And so I proceeded all the way from my birth in a National Health Hospital, newly created, right through to my doctorate at Oxford, all funded by the state, because the state was offering chances to the left behind. All that's over in Britain, unfortunately. Right? But it's not started here. The president's posed the right challenge. How do we include the left behind? And then now we've got to turn to the who has to do what, when, to make the changes that will achieve it. Right? So, how do we do it? I'm going to give you a series of examples, what actions have to be taken to produce change. And of course, if you don't do anything different, you've already got your answer. You'll stay exactly like you are. Right? You may recall that Einstein defined madness as doing the same thing and expecting something different. Right? So unless you change, you'll stay untransformed forever. Let me give you an example, a rather embarrassing example, of a president who thought he knew all the answers without reading a book, right? Or indeed without listening. Right? So because it's embarrassing, I didn't know him, and I did work with him for a while until I decided that it was another hopeless case. This country was not going to transform. So I'll keep them nameless, but his big idea, I know best, was to transform the congestion in his capital city. And he said, I know how to do it. I know how to do it. What we need is buses. And so, there and then, with no consultation with anybody, he announced, I have just bought 1,000 big buses. Right? Now, 1,000 big buses are quite a lot of money. They're well over $100,000 each, and so this was an expenditure of about £150 million. So it wasn't chicken feed, right? But there it was, my instant solution to the congestion in my capital city. 1,000 buses were duly imported. Right? What was missing? What was missing was any sense of strategy and collaboration with anybody else. So there were no enterprises, there were no small firms able to run these buses. Nor had there been any thought in government about what routes would you travel, what would be the schedules. Right? And so this was 1,000 buses with no support either from planning in government or partnership with the private sector to provide the businesses that would actually run these things. And so what happened to those 1,000 buses? Well, they were parked in a big, it takes a lot of room for 1,000 buses, so they were parked there And what happened to them? You can guess, if you think for a moment. Not one of those buses ended up on the streets of that city. They all got plundered, taken apart, exported, sold off. So it just became part of the overall corruption of the society. So that was about $150 million burnt through one wild gesture. I know how to fix it. So that's how not to do it. That president pretended to know what he was doing without listening to anybody. So what's the alternative? The alternative is learn rapidly. If you don't know what to do, you better find out. Right? Learning rapidly is the secret of building a viable strategy. The best example in the world of that spirit of rapid learning is Deng Xiaoping in China, who inherited a collapsed economy from his predecessor, Mao, and he set about transforming it. Deng was a modest guy from the provinces. He kept his provincial accent all his life, and the first thing he did was actually go and have a look at Hong Kong and think, oh, that seems to be working. That seems to be a good idea. He also went to visit Singapore, and he thought, that seems to be a good idea. Could we use those ideas in China? That was the birth of modern Shanghai. But he described the process of learning as an analogy with trying to cross a wide river with no bridge. And he said, we knew we wanted to get to the other side, and all we could do was feel with our feet for stepping stones. And it's that process, feeling for stepping stones, that was the process of crossing the river. You didn't know everything. You went step by step, stone by stone. You discovered the next move. So think of yourselves as in that same process of transformation. Just like in China, it took 40 years. They kept this process of learning by stepping stones going for 40 years, and that produced the most spectacular reduction in poverty ever seen in the history of the world. So we know that process worked. So just keep that image, you're crossing the river. There are two ways of rapid learning. And the first I'm going to talk about is learning by experiment. And that is indeed the hallmark of the International Growth Center. So let me take the case of each ministry. What you're trying to do is build a cascade of experiment. And I'm going to give you an example of that, building that cascade of experiment from Rwanda. It's actually a comparison of Rwanda and Tanzania, and I'm afraid it does involve the World Bank. I have to say, I directed the research department at the World Bank for 5 years, and I have enormous respect for the staff of the World Bank. But this particular story, they don't come out too well, right? So forgive me in advance, my former colleagues in the World Bank. Right? So the task at hand was how to register the ownership of land. That was enormously important, because if you could register your ownership of land and establish title to a plot of land, only then was it safe to build on it. And so if you want a city to go upwards, not just to be a city of shacks, you need security, legal security, that where you're building, you actually own it, right? And for that, you need a register, a land register. So the question is how to do it. And my colleagues in the World Bank thought they knew how to do it, and so they advised Dar es Salaam, the mayor of Dar es Salaam, how to do it, and I was part of that. I was in the room when all this was happening. So the advice that was given was you set up a legal process of courts with lawyers, and you have professional surveyors, and the surveyors plot the boundaries, and then you, when there's disputes, you argue it out in courts with lawyers, and there are judges who decide. Dar es Salaam tried that. It was costing $3,000 to register each plot, and it is estimated it would have taken something about like a century to finish doing it. So it was incredibly slow. It was also very unfair because it was a gift to the rich. The rich were able to hire the fancy lawyers who appeared in court. The left behind had no fancy lawyers. And so it was a grab of land by the well-connected and powerful. So it was a disastrous piece of advice. Rwanda decided, first of all, they couldn't afford that sort of money. They couldn't afford $3,000 a plot. And secondly, they couldn't wait a century to do it. And so they thought, is there a better way of doing it? And they learned from their own context. They said, how can we do it? And they innovated. They decided, we don't need fully trained quantity surveyors. That takes years, and we don't have them. But can we train up people very fast who have that skill? Enough skill to go with a mobile phone, use GPS, and record the coordinates of the plot of land. So that was one thing they built very fast. They trained up people with enough skill to do that. But the real innovation was, instead of using law courts and all that, they decided we'll be participatory, we'll be inclusive, we'll work with the community. And so they trained people to go into the community, gather a crowd around them, and then say, who owns the plot of land where I'm standing on now? And people in the community would, sometimes they'd be clear, you know, it belongs to Benno here. Sometimes there'd be a dispute, and then they'd talk about it and argue the community, and they'd say, come on, we know who really owns this. And then the person would go with this community, with the community, and say, what's the boundaries of the plot? What are the coordinates? And they just go around with their mobile phone going click, 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 and they get the boundaries of that plot, agreed there and then by the community, and then they'd move to the next plot. That didn't cost $3,000 per plot, it cost $6 a plot. It didn't take a century to do Dar es Salaam. They managed to do the whole country in 3 years. Not just Kigali, the whole country. Right? So that's the transformation. Some stage you want to listen to the World Bank. Sometimes you have to think for yourself. And that is an example of where, because the Rwandans understood their context, not just their geographic context, but their cultural context, much better than the World Bank, they knew that they could call on community to resolve this problem, and that's what they did. I'll give you one other example, which is inclusion, and it's again from Rwanda. I apologize it's often Rwanda, because they've got a mindset of innovation, which is exactly the mindset you need. Right? So this is an example of the problem of how to deliver good health services around the whole country. They wanted to be inclusive of everybody. They themselves, necessarily as the government were based in the capital city, Kigali, they were getting decent health services. There was a good hospital there. But they wanted something that would be inclusive of the whole country, instead of the message, if you're sick, get to Kigali or forget it. And so they decided they needed good clinics distributed all around the country. So they built them, they staffed them with well-trained people, but the devil is in the detail. And here the devil was, can you provide blood transfusions in that clinic? If you can't do blood transfusions, there's a lot else you can't do. So how do you get blood to clinics all over the country? How do you get it fast? Right? Well, the technology was you buy a Pajero or one of these big fancy Land Rovers or something, and you refrigerate the back, and you drive for hours. But Rwanda is very hilly without a proper road network. So doing that, they worked out, would be killingly expensive. Right? So, necessity. Is there any other way of doing it? Right? And they came up with a technology which had also been invented in the west coast in California. It had been invented by Amazon. Right? How did Amazon deliver parcels to customers? Using drones. Right? Did Amazon think we could also deliver blood to health clinics using drones? No, they didn't. Right? Across the way, the Pentagon was delivering drones. What were they delivering on drones? Death to people they thought were terrorists. Right? Personalized death. Right? So they also knew about drone technology. Did they come up with the thought, as well as delivering personalized death, we could deliver blood to clinics? No, it was too far away from their mindset. So who thought of it? It was the Rwandans. The Rwandans thought, we can't afford all this fancy stuff. And so they thought, what's the technology we could use? Is there one? They were the ones who thought we can deliver blood to clinics by drone. Now, the nice news is, once you've got one country doing that, other countries look. And so, shortly after that, I was talking with one of the government members in Ghana, and they said, we are now delivering more blood by drone to clinics than Rwanda is. Right? So there's a network where there's learning. So that's the spirit that you need in each ministry. You devolve. You do it the same thing at the local level in the Ministry of Local Government. You devolve not just money, but also agency, the power to actually spend that money. The more powers you devolve, the more participation you'll get. In my own country of Britain, which is the most highly centralized country in Europe, so don't copy Britain, but in Britain, because it's so centralized, there's no powers devolved to local governments, and so local people know that local government can't do anything, and so nobody votes. Turnout in local elections in Britain is under 25%. If you go to continental Europe, where a lot more power is devolved to the regions, turnout is somewhere around between 75 and 85%. And so where you actually devolve powers as well as money, you get the population saying, we're going to hold this local government to account. And that, I think, can be a very useful message Your Excellency in Zambia, that you don't have to say, I'm delivering good things to the Copper Belt. You say, I'm delivering powers to the Copper Belt and money to the Copper Belt so that you, people of the Copper Belt, can take these decisions. And if you're not getting what you want, well, use your vote in local government to change things. I've got very little time yet left, namely none. But let me give one other idea, which was so popular in Rwanda that the president wanted me to come back. Every year he holds an assembly for the top 200 public officials in the country, where they're all held to account. I was the only foreigner who's been at that. It's in an army camp for 3 days, and it's you live in a tent and you eat army food, which isn't very good. Right? So I don't recommend that as a model, but there was one message that I gave to President Kagame that he so liked. He said, "Come back next year and tell him." And I couldn't, and so he sent a film crew to film it, right? And so this is the little message that was videoed and shown. And it's about rabbits, so it's very memorable, right? Suppose that what Rwanda needed to grow, to transform, suppose it was rabbits, right? If you wanted a lot of rabbits, you'd know how to do it. You need a habitat in which rabbits thrive. Well, what do rabbits like for a habitat? Lettuce, right? So if what you wanted to do was attract rabbits to Rwanda, you just need to grow a lot of lettuce, right? Actually, what you need, both in Rwanda and in Zambia, is small and medium firms that will create jobs. It's firms, local firms, that create the jobs, especially local firms. They're much more labor-intensive than the big ones, right? So you need firms. What's the habitat that will produce firms? Right? What's the habitat in which firms thrive? And how do you find that out? A very good way is to ask your firms. Listen to your firms. Is the habitat for small firms and medium firms in Zambia, in Rwanda, good? Right? Rwanda transformed its habitat for firms. It did things like a one-stop shop, very responsive. Right? That's what Rwanda delivered, a habitat for enterprise. And it's what you will be delivering. On that note, I really have overrun my time, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. That was Professor Simon Roberts. I beg your pardon. That was Professor Sir. I have the name. I do have the name, don't I? Yes, I do. Professor Sir Paul Collier, Professor of Economics at the University of Oxford and Director for the International Growth Center, giving us a presentation entitled Seizing Opportunities to Drive Sustainable and Inclusive Growth in Zambia. We have one more presentation, which is coming from Professor Nava Ashraf, and would like to invite Professor Ashraf to please come forward now, Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics, to come and give us her presentation. Professor Ashraf, let's give her a round of applause, shall we?
Thank you, Your Excellency, Honorable Minister of Finance, Secretary of the Cabinet, observing all the protocols laid out by our Master of Ceremonies. It is a great pleasure to be back in Zambia and an honor to be presenting to you, especially because so much of the world thinks of scientific knowledge as the purview exclusively created by academics. And these scientific knowledge is supposed to make its way into policy and impact and influence policy for all of you. Except, as we all know, there's enormous gaps between what is produced in science and what actually is able to be brought into policy. But the thing is that policymakers themselves, you all, are generating knowledge for the world, valuable knowledge, and that is also knowledge lost to society, because it never makes its way back into science either. What's the way out of this loss of knowledge for society? It's for academics and policymakers to come off of their pedestals and work together, as the Honorable President said, develop a common language to develop valuable knowledge together, usable, valuable knowledge. That requires a common language. It requires a coming up with questions together that are important at the frontier. And during that process, having all of the research feed back into policy immediately, organically, in that process of rapid learning, and even having some of those insights go back into science. I stand with you here today because we've done 15 years of this type of co-generating knowledge here in this amazing country. And what I'm going to share with you is the insights, the Zambia-centric innovations that have arisen out of this co-generating knowledge that hopefully through this forum we can take forward with the incredible leadership and vision we've heard this morning. This is a picture from 2011 in Ndola with now Permanent Secretary Dr. Masonda. And we both look a lot younger in this picture, but it came about because it was a project where Dr. Victor Mukunga, who was the Director of Public Health and Research, had shared with me a challenge that Zambia was facing, which is a challenge that actually every country, many countries in the world face, illustrated by this map. So this is a map of the world that is weighted by the proportion of skilled workers in health. So this is particularly physicians. And this is the same map weighted by the disease burden, here malaria. So what you can see is exactly in the areas of the world where they have the largest disease burden are the places with the lowest numbers of skilled workers, of nurses and physicians. For example, in Zambia, there were 12 million at that time. As we heard, the population did go up now, but at that time, 2010, 12 million people, 646 doctors, half of them only in Lusaka, 6,000 nurses. So what's the solution to this? The idea posited was to recruit from rural areas community health workers, but professionalize them, upskill from these communities, upskill them, create a new cadre of civil service, essentially, that could come back to their communities and deliver these services. And in doing so, maybe to potentially provide a career that could lift with all the health sector, people based in their communities. But there were two fundamental questions on the table for this. The first was, would they be able to find people in these rural communities that actually had 12 years of education and 2 O-levels? Do they exist that can actually be upskilled and professionalized? And second, this was what the director of HR said, what happens if people become part of the civil service? Do they lose their connection to the community? Will they want to run away from their community as soon as they have a chance? And so we said, let's test it together. Do a rapid learning process, as Professor Collier was saying, and test together. And that's exactly what we did. During the pilot of this program at the first year, using 48 districts, and what we found was not only this opportunity potentially to develop a career, but stay in your community where you were connected to your family and community. Not only did people have 2 O-levels, that attracted individuals often with 6 O-levels who could have gone into nursing but wanted to remain in their communities. And that translated into, over an 18-month period, after a year of training and upskilling, they went back to their same communities. That translated into 20,000 more household visits and very large health impacts. So 31% improvement in institutional deliveries and a 25% reduction in undernourishment by children. This was then adopted by the World Health Organization as a best practice for community health delivery, for recruitment and retention of community health delivery. Again, a Zambia-centric solution which has found its way internationally, that was based on resources here existing in this country, but previously not maybe leveraged. And it leads to the possibility, just to put an idea in one's head, of the possibility of a virtuous cycle, where talented people whose talents are maybe underutilized are attracted to the opportunity of a career and stay in their communities, upskilled, remain in their communities to serve and create improvements in public services. These improvements in public service, but these people, these talented human resources, begin to inspire a next generation who don't feel like they have to only come to Lusaka if they want to grow their careers and develop, but actually can remain with their families and communities and be of service to this country. And already we've started to find that in some of these communities, for example, girls are much more studying biology O-levels. So there's a possibility of this virtuous cycle that could develop through what might be available in this next generation. So, speaking of the next generation, these are girls from and boys from a school nearby in Lusaka. And, you know, the next generation is Zambia's future here, incredible, and 50% of them are young women who, in my country of birth over the last few months, Iran, have been changing the country and the world. So this is an incredibly powerful resource we have in general. But the challenge facing the Ministry of Education, so we were asked by the Ministry of Education, here's our challenge. Girls are dropping out at 3 times the rate of boys in our education, at grade 7 and at grade 9 for secondary school. The reason given is pregnancy, but we don't really know how to solve this problem so that girls stay in school. And so what did we do? We actually tried to look for these Zambia-centric solutions. So what we did, talking about, you know, what Paul just talked about in terms of the life chances, we thought, okay, these girls are in these compounds, right? They face so many constraints in their life. Is there anyone who came from those compounds who themselves were able to even go to university here, to UNZA, and become powerful people in the country? So we found these women. We found 20 young women who had finished university education, and but were from these same compounds. And together we designed a curriculum that was based on negotiation skills, which they felt would be useful for the country, but we had to adapt it a lot because so often negotiation skills or girls' empowerment is taught in a very individualistic way about empowering the girl herself. And you know, in speaking to everyone on the ground, the importance of the social fabric in communities and the family was absolutely central. So we developed a curriculum that actually took, so it was actually based on, I used to, for 10 years I was a professor at Harvard Business School, and we taught negotiation skills to help people make money. But it was very much a way of, it was a win-win, but it was still pretty individualistic. Here we had to teach a different way that would go with the culture for a young girl, for example, to talk to her parents about being able to stay in school and not pay tuition, you know, be able to pay tuition fees, but especially to be able to study and not do the chores that she needs. How difficult is that conversation? So we taught a curriculum, That was about me, there's the position, but there's the interest, you to understand the position and the interests of the parents, for example, or the boyfriend who wants to have sex, but it turned out they mainly wanted to use it with their parents. And then together, finding solutions together, some of which involved doing a lot more chores on the weekend or going and working in the business later on, but staying in school and build. And build they did. We did this project in almost all of the schools in Lusaka. And what we found was that these girls who were in this program were significantly more likely to do incredibly well in their grade 9. You know, the national exam is very important, to transition into secondary school, and to have families who were very happy with them. And so we worked with the Ministry of Education to embed this curriculum through the now Zambia Life Skills curriculum that's in some of the schools. Not exactly in the way, we had the girls' negotiation coaches, but at least in a way that got some of the knowledge through. So this is an idea of, you know, Zambia-centric solutions which can inspire the world, because so many people said, you know, we also care about enhancing the social fabric, we also care about relationships, but we haven't learned a way of learning these skills in doing this kind of relational empowerment. And one other area that I think this is very important, especially given what the Honorable Minister of Finance said, is about population growth and fertility. So that is a very tricky area. As you know, fertility in Zambia remains high, as it does all over sub-Saharan Africa, and has not decreased significantly with economic growth in the way it has in other countries around the world. If you look across all of Africa, what you see is that this is a graph showing that men want a lot more children across all of Africa than women do. In some countries, much more. So there's Zambia in the middle. So it's actually quite small compared to the rest, but there is still conflict in the household with men wanting more children, and that puts women in a difficult situation where they don't want to use many of the family planning methods that are available because it would destroy the unity in the family. So talking to the Ministry of Health and the Reproductive Health Unit, they said, could you help us to align this gap between husbands and wives in the households? And when we talked to the women, they said, could you please talk to our husbands, because we don't want to have as many kids, but they're not in the labor ward with us. So again, we developed this program where we brought men and women, but men separately, with each other, and really went step by step on the causes of maternal mortality, in particular obstructed labor, et cetera. And what we found was that they had felt so left behind in their own way of this type of knowledge that when they learned this knowledge, in fact, it led to a significant reduction in fertility. In just 1 year, there was a 25% reduction in pregnancy among these families, but they also reported greater marital satisfaction and happiness. So when I shared this with some of the donors that had been involved in this, they said, you know, this is something that we always have some challenges with, but this is a solution that enhances family unity, but also reduces fertility and population growth. The final example I'm going to give you comes from the private sector. As the Honorable, His Excellency, Mr. President, had told us about the importance of the private sector, and indeed, it's vital. But it's an area that is very, very male-dominated. So only 1 in 3 businesses worldwide are actually owned by women, able to create jobs, and sub-Saharan Africa is very low on that. Zambia is no exception. So what determines the variation in whether women own jobs, own businesses, and can provide jobs for others? So this is a map of the world. So you've got on the x-axis, you've got gender norms, and on the y-axis, how many women own businesses. You can see that the more discrimination there is in gender norms, the fewer women-owned businesses in that country. But the more contract enforcement there is, the more women-owned businesses in those countries. And I've circled Zambia, so you can see Zambia is right in the middle of all the countries. Very low female entrepreneurship, and also kind of low gender norms, and middle contract enforcement. The negotiation skills from the girls in high school who are now entering the labor force, those could help with the gender norms. But what about the contract enforcement? What we did was actually map out all of the firms in Lusaka. This is a map of Lusaka with all 42,000 firms, and also the institutions that can help with contract enforcement. So the small claims court, the police, and market chiefs. And then we did an in-depth study with manufacturing firms in particular, because those are places that with great opportunity for growth and job development, with economies of scale, but which require a lot of kind of collaboration and trust. And in the baseline, you can see that the women's businesses are all only in food and tailoring, which is much lower profits. Mainly what they said was because they felt that they would be taken advantage of if they started collaborating or growing with male partners. And so what we look at is, do these institutions help women to be able to grow their businesses? And indeed, what we find is that when women are in markets, and especially in markets with unbiased chiefs, they are able to have businesses and grow those businesses a lot more. And we even do what's called an investment game, where they put some real money, we give them some money, they can invest in it with others, men and women. And when they have access to an unbiased chief, they are much more likely to invest than otherwise. Men are always more likely, but women will invest even more than men. And what that does is grow the pie for everyone. It means that both men and women are able to take advantage of that economic growth and investment. But that initial investment requires trust and collaboration. So this was just a kind of very quick, I didn't want to take too much time, but I wanted you to be able to potentially, in different domains that are important for growth, in entrepreneurship, in the private sector, in population growth and fertility, in human capital development and education, and in public services delivery and the civil service. To see how extraordinary it has been to be able to co-generate knowledge, to develop here with everyone the Zambia-centric solutions focused on trust and unity that can empower the human resources that have been left behind and allow them to make their contribution to economic growth. So I very much hope that in this conference, in this forum, we might be able to bring some of these forward and create the innovations that are in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Professor Nava Ashraf, Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics. And you'll be glad to know that both Professor Ashraf as well as Sir Paul Collier will be presenting this afternoon in the parallel workshops that will start immediately after lunch. Professor Ashraf will be in the Governance for Growth workshop, which will be in this hall. And Professor Sir Paul Collier will be in the Unlocking Zambia's Mining Potential, which will be in room 2 upstairs. Mr. President, we are grateful that you have stayed with us up to this point. We know you are pressed for time, but I couldn't help but notice you taking down notes as these presentations were going on. I don't know if you have any very quick reactions to... No? All right. No? All right. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of this opening ceremony and this first session of our forum. We will close this session with the national anthem, and so we will stand. After the national anthem, we will all remain standing as the President is ushered out, after which we will take our seats in here, and then we'll give further instructions as to what will follow. But once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to the President for his presence here and for sticking with us up to this point. Shall we all stand for the national anthem? Thank you. Please remain standing, ladies and gentlemen, as the President is ushered out. Thank you. Thank you, Excellency. We can give a round of applause and appreciation to the President for gracing our occasion today. Thank you. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. So no doubt if you have the program in front of you, you will notice that there are some changes that have to be made to it. We should have started with the parallel workshops, 3 of them, earlier on before lunch, but now they will be held after lunch. So time now is just 3-4 minutes before 13 hours. So we will go for lunch from here. We'll go straight into lunch. And from lunch, we will then go into the different parallel workshops. So I said there's 3 of them. The first one being governance for growth. And that one will meet here in this room, in this very room where we are. The second one is unlocking Zambia's mining potential. This one will be in room 2. Room 2 is upstairs in this very wing, in the old wing, upstairs in room 2. And the third workshop will be on raising agricultural productivity, and that one will be in room 4. Room 4 is also upstairs.